You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
I'd like to welcome to the microphone Supreme Court Judge David Ashton Lewis.
Oh, thank you for having me, and good morning to Lynn, good morning to Somerset, and of course, good morning to all the other listeners whose names I don't know. Thank you for listening to us.
That's good. Okay, well, we've got a very interesting topic on the back of last week, and we wanted to talk about rights and responsibilities.
Ah, yes, what an important topic in our current day and age. I'm just reading a book called The Social Contract, because I'm speaking in the United States. I should say to listeners, I'll have to pre-record shows because I'll be away for the next 2 Thursdays, and I'm speaking on religious freedom as a roadway to peace. Now, that's quite an interesting topic. Anyway, I'm reading a book, The Social Contract, and it contains the important writings of John Locke, of a man, I've forgotten his first name, Hobbes, and a man called Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and they were writing in the 1700s when our society was really starting to think about rights and responsibilities in modern societies breaking out of dominated by religion, dominated by monarchs, and that the people are the source of authority in government. And the 1700s was a really interesting period in Western European and British politics and philosophy, thinking, yes, we all have responsibilities, and thus we should all have rights. And so it was really huge, and you watched it from the it started in the late 1600s. Hobbes and Locke were writing there. Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote a tract called The Social Contract, which is the name of the book, but contains the other writers. And it was, what is the contract? Or there is a contract between the governed and those who govern. And they each have rights and they each have responsibilities, but all authority emanates from us little bleeders, you and I, and the people. And that imposed great responsibilities on leaders. Now, of course, it was an age when the French people rose up and said in 1789, we're not going to be treated as dirt, while the wealthy live in castles and everything. And of course, they went through a dreadful revolution. And then for the next 100 years, it happened all throughout Europe, through Germany, Italy, Spain to a certain extent. Now, the British were smart because they'd really started the concept rights and responsibilities in about 1690 with a document called the Bill of Rights. And it quite clearly set out that the government of the British people, or the English people at that stage, arises from the house of the common people. And of course, we are all the inheritors, all the children of that British line, Canada, or firstly United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries really took up what the mother country, England, had developed. So we're facing a crisis of that now, aren't we? Because everyone's very clear, Cole, on, well, these are my rights.
Sure.
I have a right to this, I have a right to that.
They've forgotten the yang, haven't they? They've also got a responsibility.
Well, if you ask them, and I did this as a judge, and I'm doing it now, although on the Supreme Court it's very hard because you're really just listening to appeals from the Court of Appeal. But as a High Court judge, which I would conduct trials, and I said on a number of occasions before sentencing, I've heard you very clearly on what your rights are. Now tell me what your responsibilities are when you live in an orderly, first world society like Australia. And I'd be met in 99% of the cases with silence or with, well, I don't know about that. And I'd say, well, unfortunately for you, the law does.
Yes.
Yep.
And that is the point. I mean, you do hear that. This is my right. This is what I deserve, I need, I have to.
Yes.
It is preordained that I get this. But don't forget your responsibilities to the society that provides you those rights.
Yes, such as pay your taxes.
Yes.
Such as obey the law, whether you agree with it or not. If you want it changed, and we've just got a society in lots of ways now that basically says this, I'll obey the laws I agree with.
Sure.
But I won't obey those I don't agree with. That's the first breakdown of properly governed society, because if you don't agree with the law, there's a mechanism for changing it, and that is through your elected representatives and putting pressure on them, listen to what we say and act. And this is being tested now with the terrible cancer of violent youth crime. Every night on the television, you see security cameras showing masked, hooded
Yes.
young men are breaching everyone else's rights, the right to peace, the right to security in their own home, and stealing and frightening. Look at that recent one of that man in the service station who went into what he thought was a safe room, and these young men broke into the door, took his wallet, took his wedding ring, and then disappeared. And as we've spoken on past shows, when people's rights continually are ignored, and that is the right to civil society, where laws prevail, you get revolution.
Yes. Look, we've spoken on this in previous programs,
Yes.
and again, more and more I hear from the listeners and the volunteers and so forth, and the politicians from time to time. Look, some are saying it is, unfortunately, the youth laws are to blame. Some are saying that the judges aren't stringent enough. Some are saying that there's not enough room in the judicial system if we do lock them up.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, whatever the problem is, it requires fixing, and it needs stamping on now.
And it starts with our culture. It starts with, look, I've known you for 15 years, and I've come to observe you, and I can see the type of upbringing you had. I had the same upbringing. You know, that upbringing was I had parents who loved me, who cared, and they laid the foundation. Now, as young men, we all did the silly things. One Friday night with Lee Carbines, came from a very wealthy home just around the corner from me, and Mother had just been given a brand new Holden Premier. This was 1967. Brand new Holden Premier, leather seats, and they went out to the golf club. And we were home, Lee and myself and two others, and Lee said, let's take the old cheese's car for a drive. And we said, oh, do you think so? So we then spent the next 2 hours driving around Melbourne in a brand new Holden, and we were going along a road in Melbourne called Footscray Road. We'd driven right across Melbourne to Footscray Road. We pull up at lights. Luckily, Lee, as a 16-year-old, looked 21. And a police car pulls up beside us. And we're sitting there shivering in our boots, and Lee just looks over and gives a wave, and the police look at him and wave him, and off we go. So we've all done silly things in
Sure.
youth, but if you've had the right upbringing, you get through it and realise, oh, that was wrong.
Correct.
So we've got to start with parenting. But we're in a society now where we don't have those the church has no authority anymore.
Look, parenting, and everybody wants to do a good job. You can't think that that's not what they set out to do in the first place. But it now costs so much to pay off a house and to live and to put your kids through school that both parents have to do that. And some households, both parents have to work two jobs to actually hold that down, which doesn't leave a lot of time for guidance of the children.
Well, but then what happens with that? People will say, because one's very tempted to say, so what is the government doing about that? The government can only do what it can do in the times. Well, we don't live in the 1960s anymore. Look, my mother didn't work, and my father's salary was enough to put us through private school, have a lovely home, and have a holiday every year, and run a car and do everything. And so we've got to accept that times have changed. But I feel that we're probably not spending as much time saying, all right, we accept that this is a different age, that things are expensive. Look, I paid $214,000 for the house that I live in now in Robina 24 years ago. I'm now getting offers of $2.25 million for that house.
Sure.
Now, that's pretty good saving over 25 years, a quarter of a cent, 24 years, sorry. But so we've got to accept that times can never go back to where they were. They will go forward. But I wonder how much time is put in by sociologists, psychologists thinking, okay, now how do we react? So how do we react to this youth crime problem? Is it bad parent? It's a combination of everything, in my view. It's a combination of pretty poor parenting, poor policing, and we haven't got enough police, of poor judicial behaviour, and more importantly, poor governmental lawmaking behaviour. Now, you can't treat a 16-year-old like you would treat a 46-year-old who did these things. But that 16-year-old has to feel a slap across the knuckles.
Look,
and you get everyone saying, oh, but if you do that, you make them worse. Well, I know many, and did know when I was sitting as a single judge, young men, when we'd have forums and talk, and they'd get up and make statements, not just all men, some young women, and would say, I'm never doing that again. I never, ever want to lose my freedom again.
And that is the point. One of the big things for me is that you hear of that terrible crime up in, I think it was Ipswich, Toowoomba, where the grandmother was killed in front of her granddaughter.
Yes.
I don't care what age you are. If you willfully use a knife to kill someone, it's yet to be decided whether it was willful murder. But do you know what? Those people have been deprived of a family member. The granddaughter doesn't have a grandmother anymore. I'm sorry, you're going to have to feel the effect of your actions.
I think you're right. And I think we are failing as a society, particularly with people under the age of 18. We are failing to impose ways that make the majority would think, oh, I'm never doing this again. We're failing in that because we've got this, and I saw it coming on when I was first at university in 1968. Oh, young people, their brain hasn't developed. They haven't got, and you're hearing things like, you do the crime, you do the time.
Sure.
I think that there's some reality in that. I think we've got to stop always reverting back to, oh, but they're a child. Well, they might be a child, but you just touched on it, the damage they have caused through appalling behaviour. A mother's been lost, a grandmother has been lost, and the two young ones who were with her when this happened, what trauma have they suffered seeing their grandmother brutally stabbed and dying?
Yes. Look, I know this is probably a fairly childish view or a simplistic view of the situation. I often see some of the parenting strategies, and I look at one little girl jammed her finger in a car door and slammed it, and it was naughty car. No, silly girl.
Yeah, that's right.
What are we teaching there? We're just teaching that it's everybody else's fault.
It's everybody else.
Mine.
Yes, I think you're right with that. And then it transitions from, well, it's not my fault, it's everyone else's fault, and it's the government's responsibility.
It's getting rarer and rarer for people to just sit there and say, I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings. It's usually now, oh, but I only did that because you did this.
I know, it's always...
And that's enough.
It's reactive rather than proactive.
Yeah.
Like I had two people in all my time on the High Court stand up after they were found guilty by the mini jury, stand up and say, when I gave them the opportunity to speak before I imposed a sentence, 2 times, and they were both men in their late 30s, one, late 40s, the other, said, I have nothing to say, I was completely wrong, I'll accept whatever punishment, Your Honour, that you hand me.
And it is getting that way. As we talk about, common sense is becoming less and less common, and empathy or understanding, and not just being concerned with oneself,
Yes.
and considering what your actions actually caused on other
Yes.
people.
And yet, I saw something the other day, and they had a photograph of a really attractive woman in the late 1940s. In the types of dresses that our mothers wore. I saw my mother, this gear, with their hair and fingernail polish and nice stockings with a seam down the back. And then they had a photograph of that equivalent young lady today. And it said, the first photo, with 1940s, was concerned about being married, responsibilities to husband and children. If not married, being concerned about finding a partner in life and building a good civic life. They then showed the other one. She had Botoxed lips that was so blown up, green hair, and they pointed out that in the first photograph there was a little bit of makeup and nice clothing. And the second photograph, concerned about self.
Yes.
I'm just concerned about me, and they showed the dress and the makeup. And again, it's all very well to do that, but you can't get a young woman today or a young man today to go back and be like they were young men in the 1940s. What you've got to do is say there are still responsibilities. You're free now and women, you're free to chase men, or you're free to not get married. You're free. You have rights. But we need to start teaching 2025 responsibilities. And because we're seeing that go, we're seeing biased press reporting. Look, just take this Palestine issue. Everything is Israel's fault. Everything. And yet, I think we spoke on this a few shows back, a poll was taken, 87% of Gazans agree with Hamas and agree that Israel should no longer exist. So who and where are people going to Gazans and now Lebanese and saying, if you don't want to be bombed, if you don't want to have buildings collapsed, what are you doing about it to say to Hezbollah in Lebanon or Hamas in Gaza, for God's sake, go, because you're bringing upon us destruction at a level that we don't know. Now, the big fear, of course, given Putin and what's happening in Ukraine, these all have the hallmark of the 1930s and building to a third world war.
And as much as I don't want to focus on what's going on over there, the big problem here is that we're a world away. When this happens to you every few years or every week, or after stockpiling for about 4 or 5 years, there's another rocket strike that kills X amount of family members or X amount of students that you go to uni with. Eventually, the society says, that'll be enough. We're getting to the point of that with youth crime, and they would have no understanding of what our frustration is, just as much as we have no real understanding of their frustration.
And then it's added to, by bleeding heart, people whose job is to bring out, in a balanced way, I read the last month, Hezbollah has fired 4,000 missiles into Israel. Where do you see the cameras rolling through and showing destroyed places or destroyed lives of those?
Yes.
You don't hear any of that. And so when Israel seeks to defend itself, then they're the world criminals. Now, when you develop thinking like that, and that's on an international level, we're developing thinking like that on a national level, a state level. Oh, the poor youths. How much do you ever hear about the people who've been traumatised, that their home has been broken into in the middle of the night, and they've had people putting a knife to them and cleaning out their garage?
The example is that we're not being told the entire story.
No,
it's like hospital ramping and ambulance ramping. There was, I saw a figure, 25,000, forgive me, I can't remember the exact figure, have moved here in a 3-month period into southeast Queensland, right, from other states. Yes. The infrastructure just cannot deal with that kind of movement of people. So we see the report after report ramping government, aren't they terrible? I'm sorry. Even if you and I were in the government making the best decisions possible with an unlimited bank account, it would take time to actually get that done.
Yeah, the bank account is limited.
And that's the other bank.
Because there's so that we've got to really think, and as I said, have sociologists teaching youth and universities. There is a real need to appreciate the wealth of our first world society here, particularly in Queensland. Sure. I think of my son Somerset. We were driving up to the Spit yesterday and walking on the beach, and he said to me, this, in his American accent, he said, this place is paradise. He said, here we are on this pristine beach in spring, and there's half a kilometre between people lying on their towel. And then we walk back through to the car park and everything is nicely laid out. The green strip between the beach and where the cars are parked. And he said, you then drive on roads here. And he said, the only thing I've noticed now, it's always busy on the roads all day now. And we were talking about the amount of immigration because what I saw figures, there's 1,000 Australians a week moving into the Gold Coast. So that is 52,000 a year.
Sure.
And you're right where you say we haven't got the infrastructure for it.
So just pulling us back because we're coming to the end of the program, rights and responsibilities. Let's just focus on that responsibility component because everybody sits there and says that I have a right, I have a right. We very much know what our rights are. Let's remind everybody of their responsibilities.
And we very much know what our responsibilities are. We just conveniently forget them. Like our responsibility, you're a young man or an older man. I've just been listening to cases of 50-year-old men finally being prosecuted for sexual assault of teenage girls when they were teachers or headmasters. Now, that person knew exactly what their right was, not to do it. But we then lived in a much more freer society where they thought they could. Again, 100 years ago, if a man had a view that he wanted to assault either sexually or violently a woman 30 years younger than him, 9 times out of 10 he didn't do it because society would not countenance it, and the punishment you would get was terrible. So I think we do know what our responsibilities are, but it's much more easy and convenient to put them aside.
When we don't want to look at our responsibilities. All right, couple of minutes to go, David, summing up.
Well, I think I'll leave it to you to sum up.
Mate, you're the man. They're here for you.
My listeners, you always see. No, I keep telling you this and you don't believe me. And one of them is my son. He said, Dad, it's good to hear you, but Colin makes the show as well. Well, and he then said to me, I prefer listening to Colin than listening to you. So anyway, look, summing it up, we live in a modern first world society, and it didn't fall out of the sky. It came through the hard work of our ancestors.
It did.
So we have a responsibility to be aware of that and to know, yes, we have rights and to demand that they be respected. But responsibilities are easily formed if you think about, well, what my rights are, well, they're the rights of everyone else as well. So there's too much emphasis in our own lives on my rights, and there needs to be more emphasis on, yes, you're completely right in that, but you also
have a
must
responsibility.
recognise your responsibilities.
Absolutely. Well, David Ashton Lewis, always nice to have you here again. And you're taking a couple of weeks away. We'll see if we can do a few recordings and get those in the meantime. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Well, goodbye to Lynn, goodbye to Somerset, and goodbye again to all those listeners who enjoy the show. Have a good day. Thank you, Cole.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4CRB.com.